All right, let's get started. So I know a lot of people signed up because this AI for designers is definitely targeting designers. It's also targeting designers who want to build. I think the way the future is headed is, the cost of building what traditionally was you had to know how to code, you had to set all these things up. I think that's going to almost zero. And so designers especially, we often imagine the vision, the things that should be built, as well as how they should look and function with software. And I think a lot of designers can get closer to building, whether it's building your own apps yourself, but really I think finally getting to own the part of software that we are responsible for, which is the design. And design lives as front-end code in interfaces and software. And so the idea of getting closer to code is a long-term bet. For Subframe, it's our vision and, integrating, figuring out how that works with the engineering that goes into software design, right? That's really the crux that we're trying to do here, make this more collaborative, but also give more ownership to designers so that you're not just handing off pictures and asking engineers to rebuild all your work. You could just do that yourself. So to get started, I'm Filip. I'm the designer, co-founder of Subframe. I have kind of a split brain background. I did study some computer science, so I have sort of a technical mindset, and that's helped me a lot, especially these days. But I chose the design career path, really founding designer, early stage design, growth startups, and focusing on things like design systems. And that's what led me to Subframe. My other co-founders lean more engineering with a design bent, and Subframe is really the tool that I always wish I had, where I was comfortable getting close to code at most places I worked at. But you were always managing, right? Your design world, which was mostly in Figma, and then hoping that everything gets implemented. So Subframe was really built to give the designers the ability not to go from design to code, but to just design with code. So today we're going to cover how this all works, especially around, we're focusing on Claude Code here because it really has been a game changer for software engineers. I would say even in the last few months. I think a lot of these things will apply to other AI code agents, especially things like Cursor, but we'll also touch a little bit on the difference between what Cursor does, what Claude Code does. We'll actually use both, but for different things. And then where I think a lot of questions that people have is just like, where does this go in our workflow, right? Where does my design start and end? How do I get into a code base? When is the right time to do so? How do I even set things up from scratch? What's the difference if I already have one? We'll dive into that a little bit, but today we will be building from scratch. And then of course, Claude Code has its own unique interface. It's terminal based. And definitely want to cover a lot of the things that I as a designer use to get the most out of Claude Code, especially when doing the parts outside of design, getting real functionality working. And we're going to iterate, which will actually be a good example of what it looks like to build inside of an existing code base. We'll touch a little bit about that, especially the workflows of going back into Subframe, and then have some Q&A and hopefully a working app at the end of this. And so like I was saying, the core tenet behind Subframe is really that design is the medium and code is the material. We should not be translating between those two. When we are designing, we want, visual interface, we want drag and drop, but we want to make sure that everything we're building is actually the code that will be used in software. And that's what Subframe is. I'm actually using Subframe here. You can see all my cursors. I can drag things around, but Subframe is first and foremost a drag and drop design tool, right? We built this before AI. It's something that should feel familiar to designers with your layers panels, your inspector, just the ability to fully customize your design, but in an environment that's based in code. Things like Flex and auto layout is sort of built in. And as we were building, we created some personalized AI design features inside. What makes it special, and we'll touch on that as we build, is that it learns from your design. So it uses your design system that you do set up in Subframe. You can steer it by having examples, asking mix and match, and you could do things just in line. Like I could go here and maybe we'll just click the plus button and say, add a row of badges, this slide. And you could just design and prompt right in line, but you're always on that design canvas where I could continue going in and editing things however I want. And that's really where, the same thing where Claude Code isn't replacing all of engineers' work. It really comes down to using it for a lot of execution, but you being in control, right? To review, refine, to steer and curate. And that's really how we approach AI for design in Subframe. The main huge benefit with Subframe 2 is that you can actually build your entire design system and custom components. I could go ahead and just create a component out of this card. It's even going to suggest props for me. And when I make this is actually a real component in code. So we actually give you an entire design system. You're able to customize it. We're a really great tool if you're starting to design and you need to build a design system in React and you want that single source of truth. We're also working on ways to integrate it with existing code bases and design systems. We have our own prototyping feature where you can vibe code things that are linked to your designs without leaving Subframe. And then everything we do, as you can see here, exports as code. And really, it just is code. And updates in real time. It's deterministic. This code is not AI generated, and that's what makes Subframe a tool that feels like you really have agency and the ability to know that what you see is what you get. And all of that then drives a lot of the workflows, like component syncing, so that your engineers always can pull down those components that live in Subframe, the MCP server that we'll be using today to actually develop and grab this code through things like Claude Code. And then at the end of the day, this code panel is just here. You can always just copy and paste as well if you want that manual control and edits. So AI is there when you need it, but it works completely without AI as well. And I think that's really powerful. All right, going to the workflows that we'll be touching. On the Claude Code side in engineering, it's really around setting up your local dev, navigating the terminal. Like I mentioned, Claude Code is a terminal tool. I'll touch a little bit about Git. You probably hear about repositories in GitHub and committing and using that as really version control, and then setting up those MCP servers. On the Subframe side, right, we'll set up our component library. We'll also design with AI, and then integrate that design to code workflow, even though it's really design with code, unlike other tools. And from a designer's point of view, it means that, we really are hoping the place that to do design work is in Subframe, because we are that visual tool where you can create those design systems, you can design the UI visually and make just quick prototypes. And then when you move over to integrating with code, you get things like syncing components using a CLI, exporting your designs using the MCP, and then leveraging something like Claude to just build the real functionality. And the point of why start in Subframe, right? And what it really does is it makes sure that when you get to that Claude part, every single thing you designed is pixel perfect and exactly how you designed it, because you're handing off code. You're not asking another tool to translate vectors or code in a different format. You're really just giving something like Claude everything it needs to make sure that the design is covered. You don't have to repeat that work. A lot of people are probably going to ask, right, especially if you're using these tools at work, is what about my design system? Maybe you already have one. That's perfectly fine. There's a couple things that you could do if you like what you see with Subframe today and where the future is going. First and foremost, we're working on ways to import components directly from code. That's the holy grail, where if you already have things, you can bring them into Subframe one-to-one, and then be able to keep syncing them, right, as you make edits. In the meantime, you could recreate in Subframe. Our Ask AI feature is actually really great for that, where you could give code for specific components and ask it to rebuild it. You could, of course, build things manually. But the main thing is that anything you build in Subframe can live alongside existing React code bases. And we see a lot of people use Subframe when you do want that new design system. Maybe you're migrating an old one or one that wasn't really finished, and you want to bring things in and eventually have the design system you built here be that source of truth. And then lastly, you could still just use Subframe as a design tool. This is almost similar to what Figma does, right? Because nothing in Figma is actual real code. If needed, and you are working on production code base that's fairly complex, you could do things in Subframe, but then when you do move to that step of integrating with tools like Claude Code, you basically figure out how to map it, that, hey, when you see button, use the button in the right, use our existing button. And we've seen success, with people doing that as well, even though you'll probably lose some of that design fidelity. All right, so with that kind of context, let me pause real quick and see if there are any questions in the chat. So Figma to Subframe, right? I touched a lot about code. Right now, we don't have a direct way to import from Figma. We are planning on figuring out how to use the Figma MCP, similar to how Claude uses MCP, to help you rebuild that stuff. Right now, the best way to get started is things like importing your theme tokens, which we do support, and then using screenshots or copying frames as images. To have Subframe start to rebuild those things. So again, we are fundamentally on a different different medium than Figma, so you can't just copy and paste. But I think the tools are getting there where a closer integration to help you move over really quickly will help. We default to Tailwind, but it's not only Tailwind. You can inspect CSS properties and things like that, or use the MCP server to do that conversion for you. But Tailwind is the most one-to-one through our deterministic code export, if that makes sense. And then, yeah, we'll touch about things like the skills file and NPM package import. Not right now. That would be coming with some of the work that importing from code would entail. So maybe Urban can touch on that a little bit as well. All right, let's get into actually designing. So what we have today is pretty much a blank project. So it's something that you would see if you signed up for Subframe right now. Quick tour around Subframe is, because we're so design systems driven, everything starts with defining that theme. That's over on the themes page. These are essentially your tokens. There's a bunch that come out of the box as defaults that you could further customize and edit. You could also create your own tokens, like maybe a secondary background that we'll use for some things. And I'll map that to neutral 200 or maybe neutral 100 in this case. And so, yeah, there's also a way to import these as CSS variables and more of the design token format coming soon as well. So this is a great way to bring a lot of the foundations of the design system from text to colors into Subframe. All of this drives components. So you also get an out-of-the-box component library. This is very similar to ShatCN. It's built on top of Radix and headless components. And the cool thing here is that it's automatically driven by your theme. You get a bunch of the basic things out of the box, but you could go in, kind of replaces Storybook, because people like engineers and designers can actually go here and see the component and all of its props. But then the magic is when you can enter design mode for any component. Now we're looking at this component, we see our variants, and we could go ahead and just start editing it, right? So if I want all our alerts to have a little bit of a shadow, I could do that. And I have just updated the underlying component in code that will be synced when we get to the building part. It's also a good way, when I mentioned that you could use AI here to help you set up your design system a lot faster, or if you have existing code that you want to bring in, you could ask AI to make edits directly in components. Maybe here I'll say create a variant, create a vertical variant for an alert that appears as a floating card. I can use prompts, or I could paste a bunch of code here. Maybe if you do use the Figma MCP server locally, you could paste that code here as well, and we'll make edits to your components. And so you can sort of really go one by one on the component level and start building that. And you could see that simple prompt, but it actually created an orientation variant for me with two styles, right? Horizontal, which was this default, and this vertical style. So it's a pretty cool way to be able to very quickly match that design system that you already have. Or if you're building new, right, still you might have a vision where you want to look a certain way, and you could go component by component and apply that. All of this is fully editable. You could delete components, you could create new ones, and you're really building up that system, because components are special. They sync, they're the source of truth for your design system. So especially when we can get that import from code, it really becomes like one place to manage all that. But let's get into designing. So once you have those foundations set up, everything's built around pages in Subframe. And this is very similar to when you create your states and your flows in tools like Figma. Our pages are sort of like a responsive page editor. Everything, as you were seeing with the presentation, has auto layout built in. You can, of course, start from scratch, drag things around, but you can't just put things anywhere, right? Because that's not how the web works. So things like, you could really think of it as auto layout is built in, responsiveness is built in. Our concept of stacks is really just like an auto layout. And it's very easy to add something quickly. And you could see that if I go ahead and preview, I'm really seeing it work exactly how it will in the browser. So it's a really great way to actually design responsively. People ask about mobile. We're desktop first right now, but you do have mobile breakpoints, and you can make changes here as well where they're basically overrides. So if you go like this, right now I'll resize, and you can see that our breakpoint kicks in. So we're web-based for web apps. That's the React and Tailwind part. But if you do want mobile responsiveness, it's here as well. So as you can see, we could design things from scratch, but today, for the sake of time and sort of really figuring out how AI can be used in the design world as well, let's go ahead and design with AI. So I showed you guys how these insert buttons and stuff let you just make quick inline edits. We also have this Ask AI panel that lets you generate entire pages, including multiple variations. So what I'll do first, this is where you can upload things like screenshots or from Figma. But I'll first actually personalize this AI. And you can think of this as a system prompt. I think a lot of these things are similar to, right, how you might want to use Claude Code. But let's call this, again, I want to build the color palette extractor app. That's kind of my vision for today. Drop an image, get a bunch of colors. Maybe we'll see how much we can iterate about how many or converting them to gradients, but I'll just call this color app. And here we'll write something like color app is a micro design tool. Let's users extract. All right. So I'll keep this pretty simple right now, but as we go, we'll see how I manage context between Subframe and then Claude Code and be able to build that project context that becomes really important as you go further. But this just helped steer the AI inside of Subframe a little, especially because we're starting with a blank project, right? I can usually reference other designs that I already have, and Subframe actually learns from me, but we're starting from scratch. So we're just going to get some sort of basic things using our design system. Let's start with that image upload page. So let's have design a page for showing an image with a row, include the hex color for each color token. And we'll keep it pretty simple right now because at the beginning, you can be very specific, but I don't really know where this is going exactly. I kind of just want to see. And while this is happening, you can see that we have this nav bar here as well. These are layouts essentially that are predefined for things like navigation. You could edit them. And for our app, I don't think we'll have a lot of navigation. So I'm just gonna use blank for now, but we could set this up later as well. Maybe we could do it now as well. Maybe we'll have our home and this will kind of be our gallery. Let's see. Yeah, we'll just use our gallery. And yeah, maybe I'm not sure if there's a lot of things to add in our navigation right now. I think this is where if I knew what I was building, that would be a little easier. But we'll just start with that, and maybe we'll keep the settings and our user avatar here. Or maybe I'll just duplicate this and let's make this our settings. So you can see, very easy to just be able to manipulate this. And now all of my pages with this layout will have a consistent navigation. But if we go back while this was happening, our Ask AI was running, and kind of what I was expecting, we got some options that are fairly similar, pretty simple, because I was hoping for a simple minimalist app. But that's where you want to get started. I think a lot of the times, so much of what's changing with these building workflows is that you discover you don't have to pre-design everything. You really uncover a lot of things as you go, edge cases or new ideas. And we'll see that both when we get into Claude as well as here in the design process. But I like the round ones a little bit better. I'm going to apply design. The cool thing is here is if I liked maybe this one, I could just drag that in. Because we're still in design mode, we're the only tool right now that lets you really use AI for generating things, but still let you mix and match everything because we're still on that UI design layer, even though everything is code. I actually like these more, so we'll leave that here. And maybe at the top, we'll add a title bar with metadata for the image name and when I uploaded it. Just using inline AI to insert something quickly. And okay, it actually duplicated that here. So I actually just want this part, so I'm just going to drag that out again and delete that. And looks like we probably don't want this border style. And yeah, I think the padding actually looks decent right now. I'm just going to group this, bring it closer together, and we have something that's pretty simple. I think I want to position it at the top. I guess we have our left navigation, so I don't really need more navigation here right now. And we have our colors here as well. I think sometimes you might want to do things that are a little bit more advanced, and in Subframe, like maybe I want a grid layout here. You could always just right click and ask AI, or we support additional Tailwind classes. So if I did something like grid calls 4, now we would have 4 on each row, and this would be dynamic. But I guess we probably don't want that here. Maybe I'll just space these out to fill, and that will support a lot of colors for most screen sizes. So I can very quickly, because we're in design mode, like I can just really quickly duplicate, right? Check these things out and see what they're like. But I think this is really where we start. We'll call this our image palette page, but we also need sort of like an empty state or an upload modal. Maybe this is where I'll go back to my layout, and why don't we add like an item at the top. I'll make this an icon button and we'll make it large, and this will be more of our sticky upload. So let's add some padding here so that aligns a little bit better. And then, yeah, I'll be able to click on this. I'll just get rid of this logo. I'll be able to click on this, and we probably want a way to upload things. So why don't we go back to Ask AI? And because we are starting here, we can actually reference the current design. And so I think this is really cool because this is exactly what happens in code, where you're like, oh, use this to build the next thing. And so here we could use that and say, create a dialog, a image upload, and I'll just do minimalist, simple image drop zone. It's going to be pretty easy, but that way we'll know when we click that plus button, we'll be able to spin up this dialog and then upload our image and then open this back up. So we'll start just with that, or maybe we'll do the homepage as well. But yeah, let's do the homepage too. So similarly, I could just go, right? Maybe while this is going, I'll go ahead and open this up again. And similarly, I could run things in parallel and do create a home screen with a grid image, thumbnails, and small color, hard grid colors. And we'll keep it simple. Don't show any metadata or title in each card. I can spin that off and I'll go back here. We have multiple options for our dialog. Let's go ahead and save this as a new page. It's pretty simple, and just keep it like that. And you can see that this is really cool because dialogs are actually layouts. Like, it's really easy to just switch and be like, what would this look like as a drawer or as its own page? I know dialogs are pretty hard to sometimes put together, so this makes it pretty easy to just have it here. Now I want this to be a component. So that's the cool thing is right now with AI, we're not generating components because those really are part of our design system. We're using them where applicable, but I'll go ahead and create a component out of this and make this our drag and drop image upload area. That works. And I don't think we even need these text props. We'll just keep it as is. But what this will let me do is now I'm the component editor. I can add things like hover states, right? I could say, all right, when I hover on this, let's make it, a little darker. And then I could also maybe add a variant for when something's already uploaded. So let's go ahead and create variant property. And this original one is just called initial, and this one's uploaded. And we'll probably also want one that's an error. And maybe for the error, we'll just make our border red. But when it's uploaded, we probably don't want this dashed background, and our text will actually change. So that was actually a good idea to have this text be a prop, because that way we can change that to say something like the file name when we do. But because it's a prop, we're going to be doing that in code. You could see if I actually change this now, it changes it everywhere because we're just editing that default prop. So let's go ahead and change this into a checkbox though, and we'll hide this additional text. And then this prop will control whether it says successfully uploaded, something like that, or not. So this is something that's important because we are designing with code. And so a lot of these components will be used by Claude Code. Making sure that things like these props are set up correctly with things like slots or variants is going to be important to make sure that what you build does translate to code. So with that more ownership and empowerment does come a little bit more responsibility as well, that you set up your components in a way that actually makes sense. So I'll go ahead and save this. So that's pretty easy. If I wanted to quickly show what that looks like when it's uploaded, all I have to do is duplicate this. We'll make this saved, and then now I can edit that instance and then just do the file name. And maybe here, that's where we'll add our button for generate palette. Okay. I'll add a button here just for consistency. That's really just going to be like a back button. So not your most traditional dialog layout, but I think this should be kind of a fun map. All right, if we go back, so at any time I could go back to our Ask AI and see that we were looking for this image grid. All right, some cool ideas where they're actually placed over the images, but maybe we'll do this simple one, save it as a new page, and this is our home gallery. And I think that's going to be pretty simple. All we'll have to do is click on these and be able to open up. Maybe we'll just call this image detail page, and we have our upload dialog. So I think we have enough things now to actually start building, right? I could probably prototype some stuff here in Subframe as well, but I feel pretty confident that I really want to get to the working thing because that's what we're about here. So to do that, it's time to actually build the thing. Now, some of the basics, right? We're completely switching modes. We're going from the browser to running Claude Code in a local dev environment and building it. The way from a designer's point of view, I like to think about things is a lot of this seems scary and very different, especially because we're so used to web-based apps. But local dev is really just a folder on your computer. An entire code base is really just a folder and all the files inside of it. IDEs, which things like Cursor or VS Code, they're just text editors, right? They just open those files and are specifically formatted for code. Claude Code is just the terminal. That is its interface. Terminal is really just a way to run commands on your computer inside of a specific folder. And so Claude was like, hey, if I have access to everything in a folder and I can run commands, why can't we just have this in a terminal? And then things like Git for, version control is really just that code base in a cloud with specific commands and some, fancy advanced things to make sure that you're able to keep versions in sync so that everything you're doing on local, other people don't see until you push that. It's really just a way to collaborate in code, and so that people could be working on the same code base at the same time. But really, hopefully this makes things a little less scary. And that's exactly, what we'll be setting up. But it really does help to just know that these are just stuff that are local on your computer, because I think a lot of people do something like open Cursor for the first time and see, let's go new window, see this and are like, where do I start? And I'm like, great, let's open a project. And it's like, oh, this is just my folders, or clone repo. What does that mean, right? That's just pulling something that already exists in Git and creating that folder in your computer. So a lot of these things seem scary, but once you sort of understand that they're as simple as files and folders, it gets easier. So I'm going to go ahead in my projects folder. Let's do our AI workshop, and I'll just create that. I'm starting with Cursor here, actually, just because I want to show you guys, right, that you're able to manage sort of a folder and see the code in here. But we could also just start, using the terminal to build a lot of things for us. And that's Claude Code. Claude Code, you can open up your terminal, and again, can seem scary, but you're really just in a folder. You could do things like ls, and it says, oh, this is just the same as looking at my Finder. And so in a similar way, we could go to cd to go to a folder, projects, and we have our AI workshop, right? And now my terminal is in the same place as Cursor is. And then you install Claude. If we open up Arc and install code, you can do this with one command. I already have it installed, so all I have to do is say Claude, and it might ask for some kind of permissions, but now we have Claude working in that terminal, and you can see here at the top inside of Projects AI Workshop. This is the same as if I was just in Cursor, and forget Cursor's agent right now, so let's hide that. If I open this, I have a terminal in Cursor as well. And so I could actually do the same thing here and also say Claude, and this is doing the exact same thing. So that's why, again, an IDE like Cursor, which of course has its own agent, is really just also a place to have these things in one instead of using your default terminal. I actually prefer that, so we could go ahead and keep this here. But yeah, we're just in the blank project, right? So how do we get started? I usually just start, I think the main thing is you can ask it to create a new app or clone a repository, but we are using Subframe. And when you think about it, we already did a lot of the work here. So we built out the entire front end for a couple of these features, or, really a lot of the scaffolding. Let me go to docs.subframe.com. The best way if you're starting with Subframe, if you already have a code base, you're going to just open that up. Regardless, if you're trying to use Subframe, you're going to have to install it with a single command. The cool thing is that this command will also create a project for you if you don't have one already. And so for the sake of time, we're going to do that. And I'm going to say, you're going to tell Claude, because we'll try to do this whole workflow, is set up a new app using Subframe's command. So I could do that directly in the terminal, but we'll see what Claude does. And this will help us start building that context. It usually asks you for some things like, hey, can I do these commands? Let's go ahead and say yes. And it's going to start running that. That terminal path or that command to initialize it has some questions. And the cool thing is, and we'll use this more for Claude as well, is Claude can ask you questions back, right? So it says, which Subframe framework would you like to use? I'm actually going to use Vite for this one, and we'll answer some of these questions. But the main thing that we're doing here is just setting up that scaffolding for a new app. We just made that easy for you to do in Subframe because you just don't have to worry about it. The cool thing is that we'll see, all right, let's use the current workshop, is that our folders will show up here, and that's really going to start to help us understand what a code base looks like, where the design system lives, and where we'll actually be developing stuff as well, right? So I'm just letting it, all right, it's because it's an interactive CLI, it's actually trying to make this work. That is something in general, if there are terminal commands, it's the difference between like, am I using AI or am I just using things directly? Right now, our terminal code agent is trying to talk with the terminal CLI tool, and it looks like it's, let's see, trying to do this. Let me just pause here and I can split this terminal, and maybe it's just easier to run this directly. All right, see, so we basically get the same answers. And I think this is also good to know, is that if you know what you're doing, you should definitely always lean on more control, right? All right, I think it was getting caught up on this auth token. This is something you have to do when you first set up Subframe. So I can go ahead and our AI workshop project. Again, you can have multiple projects in Subframe and then just have the defaults here. And we're going to sync all of our components. So this is actually the fun part. As you can see, we have our app created. These are just basic scaffolding for our Vite app along with Tailwind. But the magic is that this source folder under UI and components now has everything that we have in Subframe as a component. And I think this is the magic. Once you start to see that if I make edits here, like you see our alert actually has this orientation prop that we set up. If I go back and say, maybe we have our warning variant, I could go back to Subframe and open up that alert. Let's just get rid of this warning variant, and I can sync this code again. I have to be in the right folder. So this is also something you might run into. I actually need to be in the My App, and let's run sync again. And you could see that, boom, our variant disappeared and the corresponding code. So that's really, I know we're just looking at the code right now, but that's really the magic of Subframe and keeping components in sync, is that what you see as a component in code here is what you'll get in Subframe, is pulling that directly. Let's go ahead and now run our server. So npm run dev, or what is it? npm run. It is npm. So now I'm getting into, again, I'm familiar with this stuff, and so it's pretty easy to do that, but that's something that Claude Code can also help you. You just figure out what are these commands to run. And you can see that localhost means that we are now rendering what is in this project. And it is just says, hey, start building your app, right? We have Subframe, it's installed, and we could see that. So now let's get into sort of the Claude Code workflows. Let's go back to our slides sort of a little bit. And I want to cover the things that I often think about when building with Claude. So we talked about the basics. Now let's talk about kind of Claude Code, right? The things that are sort of the best practices are your Claude MD file. This is essentially just a single file that's like your instruction manual that Claude reads every time. This is where you could document your code base. This will define things like use Subframe rules, use those components. This is how they get synced, and other project settings, you know, like, hey, prefer Tailwind or technical frameworks if you have there. But this is really important to define for our app. We'll also use plan mode, especially for building complex features or just initial work. I really strongly recommend using plan mode. It does a lot of research for you, especially if you're working on existing code base, and lets you go back and forth. And that's really where I do that pretty much all the time in terms of like best tips for prompting. I tell it to research the web. I ask how things work. I say weigh pros and cons of different approaches, or ask me for clarifying questions, which is like really awesome because Claude will respond with that little interactive question selector. And a lot of that prompting goes into, you know, avoiding AI code smells, like looking at existing patterns, using existing components. And I also like to document decisions, often in a different file. Like if I know that something didn't work, then I try it again. I say, hey, make a note of this, update the changes that we've made. And so that's something really cool that Claude can sort of create all these artifacts for you that are constantly updated as you go. But at the end of the day, the best AI code smell, especially for design and UI, that you could prevent is by using Subframe, because the design as code is the prompt, and you'll see that it's really powerful, that it's not a guessing game. Managing context window is important. We'll probably run into this in a little bit with compacting context. And then if something goes wrong, the best way to prevent that is to commit with Git every time you have something right, because it's actually easy to manage and revert that. But there's also a rewind command for Claude Code. So I know this is kind of overview. Let's go ahead and try to use all of these in one. So let's go back to our Claude and say, all right, we have a base Vite project set up using Subframe UI. And I'll actually go and just say, I believe I can do slash. Actually, I could just say enter plan mode. And I'll just go ahead and type this out, right? We have a base Vite project set up using Subframe UI components. The app we're building is a simple micro design tool that lets users upload images and extract the color palette user. And then this is where, again, the first time around, I'll probably do some high level work. I would say the main features are home gallery, thumbnails, and color previews, and then an image upload dialog. And next we have our image detail view preview, right? I'll say we're using Subframe components that are synced with CLI, and the front end will be provided to you via the Subframe MCP. Make a note of this in your Claude.md file. Now I'll also say, figure out the best library to use to extract from images. You could say, use web search to find something popular and modern and light. Put together a comprehensive plan based on the code base structure, the Subframe workflow, and the technical implementation for me to review. Ask clarifying questions as needed. So these are the types of prompts that I usually do to really get my head around it, give Claude sort of just enough. I could probably have done a lot more here if I have a more complex idea, but really it's also just AI coding agents, or AI in general, is really good for taking little bits of ideas and putting together something more thorough, right? And organizing those thoughts. So this is where, again, I'm using the plan mode. You can see it's at entered plan mode. I'm using web search. I'm giving it some specific things I want, including that Claude MD file. I'm telling it to ask questions if needed. We'll see if it does that. But this is really all before you start building, right? Before we start sort of managing that and just figuring out how it all works. Because I do think having the best intentions that you could review is the best way to guarantee success with these workflows. And for AI specifically, understanding the code base and some of the things it needs to do or avoid is the best way to steer it. I prefer this to create a more comprehensive plan and then execute in phases, very similar to how we develop software itself, because I do think it helps that if it knows where it needs to go, it's going to make certain decisions, but then every step you want to be kind of small so that it doesn't just like go and say, and now I'll build the entire app for you, because that usually can go haywire and it's really hard to undo that. So create comprehensive plans, review them, and then execute in small steps is usually the best approach that I find. All right, it's about to do that and start building the plan. Okay, it's going to have a few clarifying questions first. And the last thing we'll do right before we truly get into it, because I'll probably want to give those designs first, is that we'll need the MCP server. But okay, let's answer some questions. How should uploaded images and palettes be persisted, right? It's a technical question. Local storage, in memory, or backend API. Let's go ahead and do this local storage right now. In memory would probably be really fast, but let's see. Again, I want to show that it actually builds some real stuff. How should we do navigation? React router, sure. How many colors should be extracted by defaults? All right, so this is something that I want to iterate into. So right now let's start with preset of 5. In a later phase, we'll allow users to, and I submit that. So these types of questions often uncover things you didn't think about or help start to create these phases. And I do prefer things. This is mostly for the demo, but to not be like, build everything that's complex first, especially because if we look back at our designs, right, they're actually just simple. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So maybe we'll do 5. But yeah, we'll do that here. And then I'm going to make these a component, just like that image dialog, so that we can reuse this other token. We'll have our cable here. And because I know kind of how this stuff works, we're actually going to use a children slot here, so that it's able to put in some of these colors inside of it. But this way, we'll be able to have our color swatch as a component. And let me just do 6 of these. I could just copy and paste this in to recreate, because again, these weren't components. But now we have something that I feel good about componentizing, right? And having that be synced. If we go back to our Claude, let's see what it told us, right? So it created this whole plan for us. Ready to code. All right, here's the plan. Micro design tool that lets users upload. And we got our tech stack, Subframe. It already knows it's synced via MCP CLI. That's awesome. It suggested extract colors. I don't have a preference here right now. Gave us a file structure and then told us what to do here. State to create, files to create. So here, this is actually suggesting these reusable components. And that's actually where we could say, hey, I'm going to provide you these components. So what I'll do is say, update the plan in Claude MD to make sure that you know that the workflow is for creating UI and components is via the Subframe MCP. That do not modify components in, what is it, source/UI. Those will be synced, and do not create net new pages. So again, because we're doing the Subframe specific, we are giving it these harsher rules. But I think that will help, again, create this Claude MD file, which I believe I could just see here. And it's saying these things now. It knows these framework, how these things work. And it's really talking a lot about Subframe here so that we know what we're doing. All right, this should give us enough to start. And I'm actually gonna go now and start to give it the context it needs. So I'll go page by page and grab the MCP links. Generally first you have to install this. So you could go to the MCP server. So you go here and you can install thing, copy and paste this. The cool thing here, just so you sort of understand as well, is I could just copy and paste this code. And if I put it into like our main app and literally just paste it in, if we go back to our local dev, you could see that it's already here. Like literally, I just pasted that code and now it appears exactly like in Subframe. There's no functionality, of course, but again, it's just showing the power that we really just create the code for you instead of having to always translate it through something. The MCP server just helps something like Claude Code grab that code, especially across multiple files, and be able to do stuff. So let's go ahead. It looks like it did a lot of this stuff. And yeah, let's see, auto accept edits. All right, the plan looks good. Pause and let me provide you with for each page. So the cool thing about Claude is you could really just go back and forth with it. It is pretty eager in a lot of things, especially with auto accepting edits, but I try to make things easier by letting it pause. Okay, I'll go ahead and start implementing the app based on plan. For the UI, here is the following. Here is the front end code to use. Okay, first, we wanted to do that MCP server. So let's go ahead, install. I think I might already have it installed. So we'll see if this actually works. Okay, great. You'll need to restart this. Okay, so I believe / command. Okay, there's no restart. Let me exit then. Now I'm back in the terminal. I'll go ahead and do Claude again. And then we can actually also resume, which is cool. So you could see that this app or this conversation is here. And now we're back. So hopefully that works for the MCP server. And let's go ahead, begin implementing the app according to our plan. First, just create the navigation and UI scaffolding with the provided code via the Subframe MCP server. Make sure navigation works, and I'll go ahead and just start to paste multiple things. So here we have our home gallery, and then we'll go back to our image detail page, and I'll just do this one for upload dialog. All right, and we could just say like, yeah, use fake placeholder. So again, as a designer, this just means that I'm giving it sort of the designs first. We could also ask it to do things like, build the functionality first, etc. Or if you're an existing code base, right, those things already exist. So it really depends on whether you are working with existing functionality or you're using new functionality to build. I think a lot of the times that things go hand in hand because you want the designs to kind of match, the data model a lot of the times. And if you know in your designs kind of what you want already, something like a simple app like this, that makes it easier because then if you provide that first, Claude will understand, again, the design vision. Otherwise, you might have to adjust your designs. But yeah, in general, just believing in that design is the best prompt is the most exciting because it can already dictate so much stuff. So I'm going to go ahead, yes, allow all edits, and hopefully we'll get something working here. I know time-wise, right, we are building a lot here, but I think it should be pretty easy to get wired up and at least see this. Then we'll add the color extraction, and then maybe we do some quick iteration, at least adjusting a component. But yeah, as you could see, working within Claude Code, working within a code base is not visually exciting for a designer. You're dealing with the terminal, you're dealing with code. And so that's why Subframe, we want that to be sort of the visual medium where you can actually see and preview what you're building and be able to go back and forth between that. Another cool trick, if you are working with anything existing that I often do, I actually did this for our Subframe instance as well, because we build Subframe, and Subframe is like copy and pasted code into Subframe that was actually a lot more complex for our new dialogues. And I just gave it the code and asked it to recreate it. So I believe that was here a few days ago. But yeah, I'm able to, extract something that existed in the code base, bring it back into Subframe, let me manipulate it, and then bring it back into code, and it can understand the diff because it's just looking at the code, right, one by one. And so that's kind of other ways to bring stuff into Subframe. It's almost think of it as like detaching the design from code, or bringing in the functionality. We really do focus on the UI and design aspect, but it lets you really have all that control that you expect from a design tool. All right, so cool. I think that was pretty quick for this initial thing. And it's cool that the MCP server is actually doing these searches for us. It's checking other files, and we're able to, really leverage a lot of this AI code agents, again, interacting with both Subframe and getting stuff from there for pages, but also because those components live here, being able to reference those as well. All right, it looks like we have our basic UI scaffolding here. And yeah, all right, here we are. So this is no longer the non-interactive one. We can actually click into it. It matches our designs exactly. I think actually our fonts need to be loaded in, so I could fix that in a moment. But pretty simple. I think these are just fake right now. All right, so we need to tell it to create a new image by clicking the plus button. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, open the new image upload dialog when you click the plus button. But let's go ahead and say, go ahead and start to implement the color extractor dynamically with, we'll just go for sake of time, full functionality within the existing designs based on our plan. So now I think we'll see that, again, we could do a quick reference check. Our UI components sort of stayed the same here. If you look at our app, there's now pages, and these pretty much match what we had in Subframe, right? We have a homepage detail and upload dialog. You can see that there's just placeholder data. But when you actually go in, the designs, it was able to take a lot of these designs and the exact code, and then start to add logic around it, right? Like these map functions, etc. And that's what's really powerful, is that, pages, or important to understand rather, is that in Subframe, you're building the components and the UI sort of scaffolding. A lot of that additional functionality means having to manipulate this, right? This is what engineers do. They add the business logic. And so there's a bit of a trade-off, because a lot of the AI vibe coding tools, right, they sort of build a lot of that business logic for you. And so then if you go and say, hey, engineer, like, this is my design and I prototyped it, so that's higher fidelity, they'll have to look at it and be like, okay, but where's the design part that I can extract that actually fits into our code base and our functionality and our data models? And so we have a pretty opinionated approach here where, yes, you could prototype in prototype mode and do the same thing as Figma Make v0, but the code here is pretty, deterministic and simple, as in it just focuses on the things that engineers don't want, right? It just does the styling, etc., and the layout and the component use, so that it's actually a lot more collaborative, and engineers are able to say, or something like Claude Code is like, great, I know the styles, but I know how to fit it into my system, instead of having to untangle the mess of vibe coded prototypes. Go back here, and now I could fix that font issue real quick. I believe if I go to the theme page, and because we're using Figtree, yeah, you just have to copy and paste this. So honestly, you could just copy and paste the whole thing, and we could also ask Claude. I'm not sure why Claude got a little stuck here. The cool thing about Claude is that you could run multiple agents as well. We could say fix the, fix the font loading issue, and I could just paste that. Cool. So it did that. And if we go back to our local dev, our fonts are now working properly. So pretty easy. All right, this thing got stuck. So let's just, oh, there we go. Maybe it just wasn't. All right, so now it's gonna build a lot of these things for us. Let's go ahead, and we are running out of time, so I hope we get to see this at least working. But yeah, after this, it would really be around the the iteration. And, something like, cool thing is, while this is working, you could go into Subframe, and start sort of working on the next one, where I could say, add a right panel for letting me configure how many colors to extract, and right the palette. I have some obviously ideas of this app where like, well, it'd be cool to show these little colors on the image themselves, maybe let you change it. These are all things that I'd probably start with Subframe, especially the sort of interactive mode, and then bring into Cursor or Claude. I think especially if you're building as a designer yourself, it's easy to, you probably have that initial design vision, and then once you get going, it's okay that you just run with Claude, right? I think the point with having these things like the design system set up, your Claude MD file, that it will use that properly. And Subframe is gonna be like the place where you just want to generate designs and give them as references as code. But it's not gonna be the place yet where everything is linked one-to-one, because that's the trade-off, right? We could use the cursor mode or whatever to essentially inspect our working app and make micro edits. But if you ever are like, oh, I actually want this panel like a certain way, and I want it, the right way, how I designed it, like you kind of have to just go back to Subframe and go back and just say, cool, like just grab the snippet, right? You could tweak things here all you want, even if some of these things changed, or with code sync, we'll be able to do that pretty soon. And you could, again, create these little design artifacts that go directly to code. So that's how I would think a lot about especially the Subframe workflow. Looks like this is running. So in the final moments, all right, no images yet. Okay, cool. See things like it added an empty state, right? I could just go into Subframe, create an empty state real quick that I actually want, and then be like, use this instead. But let's go ahead, have the plus button. Let's do code workshop, and boom, uploaded. We got our name, and those colors look pretty good to me. So I don't know what you think. It also added some features we didn't ask for, but it did use our components, and that's something that Claude will often do. So I would say try to steer that ship and say only build what I ask for, or match the design exactly. But yeah, pretty cool. If we went into Subframe now and wanted to add that panel, maybe for time's sake, I'm just going to go and edit one of our components we made, like this color swatch. Like, what if we actually wanted to have a border, a shadow, make this a monospace font? Pretty simple change, but describing that to an AI code agent would be impossible. Having a nuance of a translation layer from a vector-based tool would be really hard. If I go here and we sync that up, just want to make sure we are actually using that color swatch, right? Yeah, cool. So again, I would just say sync this color swatch component. Should go ahead and update that for us. Again, I probably could have just done this in the terminal. It's kind of the point of the CLI command. Looks like it's synced. We go back, and just like that, this changed. So when you think of those components from the design system point of view, that's what becomes, again, really powerful, is being able to make these widespread changes sort of very quickly. So I would say this is probably all we have the time for. I'm of course excited to keep working on this little app myself, copy and paste those variables, etc. But yeah, I hope this was productive for people. I hope you learn more about Subframe. I hope that you guys learn more about Claude Code as well. And excited to see what you guys build. These are either as personal projects, but also this is exactly how we build Subframe at work as well, and how a lot of teams are starting to integrate this stuff. If anyone does have questions about, again, integrating existing design systems from Code, Figma, like that is the next big thing that we're really trying to solve. So yeah, don't hesitate to email me or Urban, reach out on LinkedIn, follow up, because we'd love to work, especially with your team and engineers, to make that happen. But thanks for tuning in again, and yeah, we'll see you guys around.